Friends, how many thoughts do you think you have every single day? Researchers estimate the number is somewhere between 6,000 and 60,000. 60,000 thoughts. Now here is the question that most people never ask. How many of those 60,000 thoughts are actually useful? How many of them move you forward, toward your goals, your values, your best possible life? And how many of them are just noise? Worry about things that will never happen, rumination about things that already did, comparison with people you have never met, anxiety about outcomes you cannot control. Friends, most people are completely at the mercy of their own thinking. They do not choose their thoughts choose them. And those thoughts, the unexamined, undirected, automatic mental chatter that runs constantly in the background, quietly shape every decision, every relationship, every outcome in their lives. But it does not have to be this way. Because thinking is a skill, and like every skill, it can be learned, improved, mastered. This is Think Straight by Darius Foroux, a book that gives you the practical, science-backed, immediately applicable framework for thinking clearly, deciding confidently, and living without the mental fog that holds most people back. Welcome to the 30-Minute Mentor. Foundation. Friends, Darius Foroux is a prolific productivity author and entrepreneur who has spent years studying one specific problem. Why do smart people consistently make poor decisions? Not because they lack information, not because they lack intelligence, but because the way they think, the mental habits, the automatic cognitive patterns, the unexamined assumptions, systematically leads them astray. He studied philosophy, neuroscience, psychology, and the practical wisdom traditions, Stoicism especially, and distilled his findings into Think Straight. The book's central premise is both simple and radical. Your life is determined not by what happens to you, but by how you think about what happens to you. And if you can learn to think more clearly, more honestly, more deliberately, everything changes. Not gradually, not eventually. Starting with the very next decision you make. Let us go inside. Part 1, The Problem with Your Thinking. Chapter 1, Thinking on Autopilot. Friends, Foroux opens with the observation that changed how he thought about his own mind. Most human thinking is not thinking at all. It is automatic processing. He draws on the neuroscience of Daniel Kahneman, specifically the distinction between what Kahneman calls System 1 and System 2 thinking. System 1 is fast, automatic, effortless, pattern matching. It runs constantly in the background, making split-second assessments, generating gut feelings, producing the quick judgments that allow us to navigate daily life without constantly deliberating. System 2 is slow, deliberate, effortful, analytical. It requires conscious attention and significant mental energy. It is the thinking you do when solving a complex problem, when making an important decision, when genuinely examining your own assumptions. Here is the problem. System 1 is brilliant at pattern recognition. It is terrible at novelty, at genuinely new situations, genuinely complex problems, genuinely important decisions that have no precedent in your personal history. And yet System 1 is running almost all the time, making most of your decisions, generating most of your emotional responses, driving most of your behavior. System 2, the deliberate thinking that genuinely serves you, is rarely activated. It is expensive. The brain resists it, and so most people default to System 1 even in situations where it is completely inadequate. Foroux uses the analogy of a smartphone with a cracked screen. Most people walk around with a cracked screen, seeing reality through distortion, through scratches, through the accumulated smudges of years of unexamined thinking, and they assume what they see is clear. They have never cleaned the screen, never examined the distortions, never deliberately chosen to see more clearly. Think Straight is the process of cleaning the screen. He identifies what he calls the 3 default thinking traps that most people fall into constantly. Trap 1, thinking about the past, ruminating, replaying, regretting, living in a mental movie of events that are over and cannot be changed. Trap 2, thinking about the future, worrying, predicting, catastrophizing, projecting into an imagined future that does not yet exist and may never exist as imagined. Trap 3, thinking about other people, what they think of you, what they meant when they said that thing, whether they like you, whether you impressed them, Here is the brutal arithmetic. In the average person's mental life, how much time is spent in these three traps versus genuinely useful thinking about the present, about what can actually be done right now with what is actually available? For most people, the answer is uncomfortable. The vast majority of their thinking is consuming energy, generating anxiety, and producing absolutely nothing of value. And the thinking that would actually move their life forward, clear, present, focused, is a tiny fraction of the whole. Reflective question: when you observe your own thoughts over the course of a day, what percentage of them are genuinely useful versus trapped in the past, the future, or other people's opinions? Be honest. Actionable takeaway: for 1 hour today, set a timer, and every time you catch a thought that is past, future, or other people focused, make a mark on a piece of paper. Count the marks at the end of the hour. The number will be both surprising and motivating. Chapter 2: Cognitive Biases, Your Mind's Built-in Blind Spots. Friends, Chapter 2 deepens the diagnosis. Not only is most of our thinking automatic, it is also systematically distorted. Foroux introduces the concept of cognitive biases, the built-in errors in human reasoning that produce consistently wrong conclusions, even when people believe they are thinking clearly. He focuses on the biases he considers most damaging in everyday life. Confirmation bias, the tendency to seek out, remember, and give more weight to information that confirms what we already believe. Think about how this operates. You believe that a colleague does not respect you. Now, every interaction is filtered through that belief. When they agree with you in a meeting, you dismiss it as politics. When they disagree with you, you take it as confirmation. When they are neutral, you read it as coldness. The original belief, which may or may not be accurate, now shapes every piece of evidence you encounter, and every piece of evidence appears to confirm it. Not because they are actually disrespecting you, because your brain is curating a reality that matches what it already believes. Foroux says the person who is aware of confirmation bias actively seeks disconfirmation. They look for evidence against their beliefs. They take seriously the perspectives that challenge them. They deliberately expose themselves to contrary information. This is one of the rarest and most valuable cognitive skills a person can develop. Availability bias, the tendency to assess the probability of events based on how easily examples come to mind. If you can easily recall a plane crash, you overestimate the danger of flying. If a colleague of yours was recently fired, you overestimate the probability of your own dismissal. If you just had a fight with your partner, you overestimate the likelihood that the relationship is fundamentally troubled. Vividness and recency make things feel more probable than they are. The corrective: ask not what comes to mind easily, but what does the evidence actually show? Sunk cost fallacy, the tendency to continue investing in something because of how much you have already invested, regardless of whether continuing makes sense. The career that has not worked for 5 years, but you stay in because you have spent 5 years there. The relationship that has been deteriorating for months, but you stay in because of the investment of time. The business you keep funding because of what you have already put in. Foroux says past investment is irrelevant to future decision-making. The only question is, given where I am right now with everything I currently know, what is the best path forward? Full stop. The sunk cost is gone. It is not coming back. The question is only what to do with what remains. Reflective question: which cognitive bias most reliably distorts your thinking? Confirmation bias, where you only see what confirms your existing beliefs. Availability bias, where recent or vivid events make you overestimate risk. Or sunk cost fallacy, where past investment keeps you in situations that no longer serve you. Actionable takeaway: identify one current belief you hold with strong confidence. Then deliberately spend 15 minutes looking for evidence against it. Not to change your mind necessarily, but to test whether the evidence actually supports the belief or whether you have been confirming it automatically. Chapter 3: The Tyranny of Useless Thoughts. Friends, Chapter 3 makes a point that is both obvious and almost universally ignored. Not all thoughts are worth thinking. Foroux says your mental energy is finite. Every thought you engage with, every worry you entertain, every resentment you replay, every comparison you indulge costs you something. And the thoughts that cost the most, The ones that consume the most energy and produce the least value are almost never the ones that deserve that energy. He describes what he calls the thought audit, the practice of examining your thoughts not just to notice them, but to evaluate them. Is this thought useful? Useful means, does engaging with this thought produce an outcome that serves my goals, my values, or my well-being? Worrying about a presentation you have already delivered, is that useful? No, the presentation is done. The worry cannot improve it retroactively. Replaying a conversation where you felt embarrassed, is that useful? Only if the examination produces a genuine lesson you can apply. If it is just rehearsing the pain, no. Planning your response to a conflict that has not happened and may never happen, is that useful? Almost never. Foroux says, ruthlessly question the usefulness of your thoughts, not with harsh self-judgment, with honest evaluation. Think of your mind like a garden. You have finite soil, finite water, finite sunlight. Every weed that grows, every useless, energy-consuming thought that you allow to take root and spread, is consuming resources that could be growing something genuinely valuable. The thought audit is the practice of weeding, not to create a sterile, emotion-free garden, but to ensure that what grows is what you actually chose to plant. Actionable takeaway: tomorrow morning, before you check your phone, before you engage with any external input, sit for 5 minutes and observe your thoughts. For each one, ask one question: is this useful? If yes, engage with it. If no, let it pass without giving it any more attention. Part 1 recap. Most thinking is automatic and distorted. The 3 default traps are past, future, and other people. Cognitive biases create systematic blind spots, and most thoughts are simply not worth the energy they consume. Seeing this clearly is the beginning of thinking straight. Friends, Part 1 gave you the diagnosis, the why of unclear thinking. Now Part 2, Foroux gives you the framework, the actual principles that govern genuinely useful thinking. And the first principle is one that has been taught by philosophers, scientists, and the greatest thinkers in history, but that almost nobody applies consistently in their daily life. It starts with a deceptively simple question: is this actually true? Part 2, the principles of straight thinking. Principle 1, think in first principles. Friends, first principles thinking is the most powerful cognitive tool available to any person, and one of the least commonly used. Foroux defines it simply: strip away every assumption, every inherited belief, every "that's just how things are done," and reason from the most fundamental facts that you know to be true. He draws on the example of Elon Musk and battery technology. When Musk wanted to build electric cars, the conventional wisdom in the industry was that batteries were too expensive, approximately $600 per kilowatt hour, and that this would never change significantly. Most people accepted this. It was the given, the established reality. Musk did not accept it as a given. He thought in first principles. What are batteries actually made of? What are the raw materials? What do those materials cost on the commodity market? The materials, cobalt, nickel, aluminum, carbon, polymer, cost approximately $80 per kilowatt hour on the commodity market. The gap between $80 and $600 was not physics. It was assumption. It was the accumulated inertia of an industry that had never been seriously challenged at the level of first principles. Musk built his own battery supply chain and changed the industry. In everyday life, first principles thinking looks like this. I could never start a business. I have no connections and no capital. Strip it down. Is it actually true that you need both to start? What does starting actually require at the most basic level? An idea, an initial customer, a way to deliver value. What is the most minimal version of those 3 things you could assemble right now? I can't change careers. I'm too old and I'd have to start over. Strip it down. What skills do you actually have? What problems can you actually solve? Who specifically would pay for that? The age is an assumption. The impossibility is an assumption. The facts are much more interesting. Foroux says, most limitations people accept as real are actually assumptions masquerading as facts. First principles thinking is the tool for distinguishing between the two. It requires more effort than accepting the conventional wisdom. It is uncomfortable. It makes you responsible for your conclusions in a way that accepting inherited beliefs does not. but it produces a quality of thinking that is simply not available any other way. Reflective question: what is one significant limitation you currently accept in your own life about what is possible for you that you have never actually tested at the level of first principles? What are the actual verified facts, and what are the assumptions you have been treating as facts? Actionable takeaway: choose one major belief you hold about what you can or cannot do. Break it down to its component facts. Write down what is actually verifiably true and separate it clearly from what you have inherited, assumed, or accepted without genuine examination. Then see what becomes possible from the actual facts alone. Principle 2. Use the Socratic method. Own yourself. Friends, Socrates, the ancient Athenian philosopher who is often considered the father of Western philosophy, had one primary method. He asked questions, not just any questions, specific, probing, relentless questions designed to expose the assumptions hidden beneath confident-sounding claims. And most famously, he turned that questioning on himself. He declared that he was the wisest man in Athens not because he knew the most, but because he knew what he did not know, because he questioned himself as rigorously as he questioned others. Foroux says, apply the Socratic method to your own thinking. When you find yourself convinced of something, especially something that is making you suffer, or that is preventing you from acting, ask the questions. How do I know this is true? Not do I believe it, how do I actually know it? What is the evidence? What was the source of this belief? Could that source have been wrong? What would someone who disagreed with me say? Not someone with bad intentions, someone thoughtful, reasonable, and well-informed who nonetheless reaches a different conclusion. What would their argument be? Is their argument actually weaker than mine, or have I just never seriously considered it? What am I assuming here that I have not examined? Every argument rests on assumptions. Some of those assumptions are solid, some are not. The Socratic question surfaces them for examination. What would I need to believe for this conclusion to be wrong? If the conclusion is genuinely true, you should be able to identify what kind of evidence would change your mind. If you cannot, if there is nothing that could change your mind, then you are not reasoning. You are rationalizing. Foroux says most of the mental suffering people experience, the anxiety, the resentment, the self-doubt, is generated and sustained by unexamined thoughts. Thoughts that feel absolutely true because they have never been questioned. The Socratic method is the practice of questioning them, not to reach any particular conclusion, but to ensure that the conclusions you reach are actually earned by evidence and reason rather than assumed by habit. Reflective question: what is the thought that is currently causing you the most pain, the belief about yourself, others, or the world that is generating the most suffering? And when did you last genuinely question it? When did you last ask, is this actually true? Actionable takeaway: take your most painful current belief and run it through all 4 Socratic questions. Write the questions and your honest answers. By the 4th question, you will almost certainly find that the belief is less certain than it felt, and the suffering it generates is partly optional. Principle 3. Separate emotion from analysis. Friends, Principle 3 is where Foroux draws most directly from Stoic philosophy. And it addresses a problem that produces more bad decisions than almost any other single factor: making analytical decisions while in an emotional state. Foroux is clear: emotions are not the enemy. They are valuable. They carry important information. Fear tells you there is a perceived threat. Anger tells you a boundary has been crossed. Sadness tells you something meaningful has been lost. But emotions, when they are running at high intensity, are terrible advisors for decisions that require calm analysis. The brain in emotional activation is literally operating differently. The prefrontal cortex, the rational, deliberate, analytical part, has reduced activation. The amygdala, the threat detection, emotional intensity center, has increased activation. In simple terms, when you are flooded with emotion, you are physically less capable of clear thinking. Foroux gives the rule that seems simple, but is transformative in practice. Never make an important decision while you are in an emotional flood. Not immediately after a fight, not in the depth of grief, not in the peak of excitement, not in the grip of fear. Wait, let the emotional intensity subside. Let the brain return to its baseline. Then, with the information that the emotion provided but without its overwhelming volume, make the decision. He uses the analogy of a snow globe. When you shake a snow globe, the snow swirls everywhere, chaotically, obscuring the scene inside. If you try to see the details while the snow is flying, you cannot. But if you set it down and wait, the snow settles. The scene becomes clear, the details emerge. Your emotional states are the snow. The analysis you need to do is the scene inside the globe. Set the globe down first. He distinguishes between two types of waiting. Passive waiting, hoping the emotion passes while you ruminate and amplify it. Active waiting, deliberately processing the emotion through writing, movement, breathing, or conversation, so that it moves through rather than accumulating. The goal is not to suppress the emotion. It is to honor it, extract its information, allow it to pass, and then make the decision from the clearer state that follows. Reflective question. Can you identify a significant recent decision that you made in an emotional state, and that, in retrospect, you would have made differently with the same information but less emotional intensity? Actionable takeaway. Create a personal rule, write it down, and put it somewhere visible. I will not make decisions of consequence while emotionally flooded. Define what emotionally flooded means for you. Define how long you will wait. Make this the standing rule and notice how your decision quality changes. Principle 4, think long-term. Friends, Principle 4 is one that every successful person understands, and almost nobody consistently applies. The quality of your decisions is largely determined by the length of your time horizon. Short-term thinking produces the decisions that feel good right now and cost enormously later. The extra dessert that satisfies in the moment and accumulates over years. The harsh reply that feels cathartic and damages a relationship. The scrolling session that relieves boredom and steals the hour that was meant for something meaningful. Long-term thinking asks a different question. Not what do I want right now, but what will I wish I had done with this moment from the perspective of 10 years from now? Foroux introduces a specific practice he calls the 10-year test. Before any significant decision, ask, how will I think about this from 10 years in the future? The decision to take the safe job or the risky one. The relationship you are staying in or considering leaving. The habit you are building or breaking. The investment you are making or avoiding. From 10 years away, many of the things that feel enormously important right now will seem trivial, and many of the things that feel like too much effort right now will seem obviously worth it. The 10-year test does not make decisions for you, but it radically clarifies them. He also introduces the concept of second and third-order consequences. Most people think about the first-order consequence of a decision. What happens immediately? What is the direct result? But the most important consequences of most decisions are not first-order. They are second and third-order. The first-order consequence of skipping the gym today is nothing noticeable. Slightly less tired, slightly more comfortable evening. The second-order consequence, after a month of skipping, is declining fitness, declining energy, declining confidence in your own self-discipline. The third-order consequence, after a year, is a measurably different physical and psychological state that affects every other area of your life. The decision to skip looked small at first order. It looked very different at third order. Foroux says, before any significant decision, ask not just what happens next, but what happens after what happens next, and then what happens after that. Reflective question. What is a decision you are currently facing where short-term and long-term thinking point in different directions? What does the 10-year version of you say about the short-term option? Actionable takeaway. Apply the 10-year test to your most important current decision. Write down, how will I think about this choice from 10 years in the future? Then write the second and third-order consequences of both options. The decision will usually become much clearer. Principles 1-4 recap. Think from first principles, not inherited assumptions. Question yourself as Socrates would. Separate emotion from analysis before deciding, and think in terms of long-term consequences, not just immediate ones. These 4 principles are the engine of straight thinking. Friends, 4 principles in. 4 powerful, specific tools for thinking more clearly. But Foroux goes further, because knowing the principles intellectually and actually living them in the noise and speed of daily life are two completely different challenges. Part 3 is where he addresses that gap. The practical application of straight thinking to the specific areas of life where muddy thinking does the most damage. Decision-making, relationships, and the inner conversation you have with yourself every single day. Part 3, straight thinking in practice. Straight thinking and decisions. Friends, Foroux dedicates significant attention to the specific process of making decisions better. And he begins with an observation that most people find uncomfortable. The majority of poor decisions are not caused by lack of information. They are caused by lack of process. People gather information vaguely, consult their feelings haphazardly, decide under time pressure, and then rationalize their decision afterward as though it were the product of careful reasoning. The result, the same types of mistakes made over and over in different contexts. Foroux gives a decision-making framework he calls the 4-step clarity process. Step 1, define the decision accurately. Most decision quality problems begin with a poorly defined decision. The person who thinks they are deciding whether to take a new job, when they are actually deciding whether their current life is aligned with their values, will make the wrong call because they are answering the wrong question. Spend real time on definition. What is the actual decision? What is the real question underneath the surface question? Step 2, gather only relevant information. Not all possible information, relevant information. The information that will actually change your decision if it is different from what you assumed. More information is not always better. More relevant information is always better. One specific, reliable data point beats 100 vague ones. Step 3, list the second and third order consequences of each option. Not just what happens after what happens, for each option. Written down, not held in your head. Step 4, make the decision and commit. This is the step most people avoid. The indefinite deliberation. The perpetual gathering of one more opinion, one more data point, one more perspective, as a way of not having to own the decision. Foroux says, a good decision made and committed to will almost always outperform a perfect decision delayed. Because in practice, the difference between a good decision and a great decision is almost always dwarfed by the difference between a committed decision and an uncommitted one. He also introduces what he calls the decision journal. The practice of writing down significant decisions, the context, the options, the reasoning, the expected outcome, and then, months later, reviewing how things actually unfolded. Not to congratulate or punish yourself, to learn. The decision journal is the most effective tool for improving decision quality over time because it forces honesty. It is very hard to maintain the illusion that you are a good decision maker when you have a written record of your actual decisions and their actual outcomes. Actionable takeaway: start a decision journal today. It can be a simple notebook or a document. For the next month, write down every significant decision you make, the date, the options, your reasoning, and your prediction. Review in 90 days. The learning will be unlike anything else. Straight thinking in relationships. Friends, Foroux makes a point about relationships that most people have never explicitly considered. The quality of your relationships is largely determined by the quality of your thinking about other people. Most relationship pain, the misunderstandings, the resentments, the chronic friction, is not caused by what other people actually do. It is caused by the stories we tell ourselves about what they do. He calls this narrative contamination, the process by which we take an event, a tone of voice, a canceled plan, an unreturned message, and construct an elaborate narrative around it that has very little to do with the other person's actual intent. The partner who does not respond to a message immediately, and the narrative becomes, they are pulling away. They are losing interest. They do not prioritize me. The colleague who is brief in a meeting, and the narrative becomes, they are dismissive of my ideas. They do not respect my contributions. The friend who cancels plans, and the narrative becomes, I am not important to them. The friendship is one-sided. In every case, a single, ambiguous behavior has been expanded into a story that generates enormous emotional pain and often drives responses that damage the relationship. Foroux says, the cure for narrative contamination is the simplest possible question. Do I actually know this, or am I constructing a story? He introduces the practice of the minimal interpretation. When you observe another person's behavior, ask, what is the simplest, most charitable interpretation that is consistent with the facts? Not the most flattering, the most minimal. The interpretation that adds the fewest assumptions, constructs the fewest narratives, and requires the least amount of knowledge about the other person's inner state. Most of the time, the minimal interpretation is, I do not have enough information to know what this person meant or intended, and the story I am constructing is my anxiety, not their communication. Reflective question. Think of a relationship in your life where you are experiencing pain or friction. What is the story you are telling yourself about that person's behavior? And what is the most minimal interpretation, the one with the fewest added assumptions, that is consistent with the actual facts? Actionable takeaway. The next time you feel hurt or frustrated in a significant relationship, write the story you are telling yourself about what the other person did. Then write the minimal interpretation. Then, if the gap is significant, consider the one action that would close it, asking the person directly what they meant. Straight thinking and your inner dialogue. Friends, the most important thinking you do is not about decisions or other people. It is the constant, ongoing, largely automatic conversation you have with yourself. Foroux says, the quality of your inner dialogue determines the quality of your life more than almost any external factor. And most people's inner dialogue is a disaster. Not because they are bad people, but because the inner voice, left unexamined, defaults to the most damaging possible patterns. The inner critic who evaluates every performance against an impossible standard. The inner catastrophizer who turns every uncertainty into a prediction of the worst possible outcome. The inner comparer who constantly measures your situation against the most curated, most impressive version of everyone else's situation. Foroux identifies 3 specific inner dialogue patterns that most commonly undermine people. Pattern 1, overgeneralization, taking a specific failure and expanding it to a general truth. I failed at this presentation becomes, I am bad at communication becomes, I will never be able to do this. Each step adds an assumption that the evidence does not support. Pattern 2, should statements, the relentless application of should to everything. I should be further along. I should be earning more. I should have handled that better. The should statements create a constant gap between reality and an imagined ideal and generate shame and anxiety without producing any change. Pattern 3, mind reading. The assumption of certainty about what other people think of you. They must think I am incompetent. They are probably judging me. They definitely noticed that mistake. The truth is, you have almost no access to other people's inner states. And most people are so preoccupied with their own concerns that they are paying far less attention to you than your inner voice believes. Foroux's approach to improving inner dialogue is not affirmations, not positive self-talk that contradicts what you actually believe. It is what he calls honest self-counsel, the practice of talking to yourself the way you would talk to a close friend you respected. When a close friend makes a mistake, you do not say you are useless and will never improve. You say, that was a tough situation. Here's what I think you could learn from it. Here's what you did well. Here's what I'd do differently. You extend the same honesty, but also the same compassion and proportionality to yourself. Actionable takeaway. Observe your inner dialogue today with one specific question. Would I say this to a close friend? For every harsh judgment, every overgeneralization, every catastrophic prediction, ask that question. Then rephrase it the way you would actually speak to someone you care about. Part 3 recap. Clear thinking applied to decisions means having a process, not just intentions. Applied to relationships means questioning your narratives. Applied to your inner dialogue means speaking to yourself the way you would speak to a good friend. Friends, 3 parts down. The problem has been diagnosed. The principles have been given. The applications have been shown. Now Foroux brings everything together with what he considers the most important and most often skipped element of straight thinking. The daily practice. Because thinking clearly is not a destination. It is not something you achieve once and then have forever. It is a practice like fitness, like meditation, like any skill worth having. And the final section of this book shows you exactly what that practice looks like, built into the rhythms of an ordinary day. Part 4, building the straight thinking practice. Friends, Foroux ends the book with the same practical humility that runs through all of his writing. He says, you have just read or heard a book about thinking clearly, and if you engage with it the way most people engage with self-improvement books, inspired for a few days and then gradually back to your default, none of it will change anything. The knowledge matters only if it becomes practice. And practice, he says, requires only three things: morning, evening, and the pause. The morning thinking practice. Before you engage with any external input, before the phone, the news, the emails, the notifications, take 10 minutes with your own thoughts. Not meditation in the formal sense, just quiet, undistracted time to observe your mental state. What thoughts are already running? What anxiety is already present? What decisions are already weighing on you? Write them down, not to solve them yet, to make them visible, to get them out of the continuous loop they run inside your head and onto paper where you can see them clearly. Then ask, of these thoughts and concerns, which ones are worth engaging with today? Which ones are useful? Which ones should I simply let pass? The morning practice sets the tone. It establishes that you are the observer of your thoughts, not the prisoner of them. The evening review. At the end of the day, 10 more minutes. A review of the day's thinking. Where did I think straight today? Where did I fall into the default traps, past, future, other people? Where did cognitive bias distort my analysis? Where did emotion drive a decision it should not have? Not as self-punishment, as genuine learning. Foroux says, the person who honestly reviews their own thinking every day improves faster than any other type of learner, because they are not learning from other people's mistakes. They are learning from their own, which are infinitely more motivating and infinitely more specific. The pause, the simplest and most powerful practice. Between stimulus and response, pause. Before sending the message, pause. Is this useful? Is this true? Is this what I would say with 10 years of perspective? Before making the decision, pause. What emotion is driving this? Have I thought about second-order consequences? Before accepting a belief, pause. Is this actually true? What are the first principles here? The pause is where all of straight thinking happens in real time. It is the gap between the automatic and the chosen, between System 1 and System 2, between the thought that comes and the action you take in response. 1 second of pause, applied consistently, will change your life more than any amount of knowledge about how to think. Actionable takeaway, commit to the 3 practices. Morning, 10 minutes before your phone. Evening, 10 minutes reviewing your thinking. And 1 specific pause protocol, the question you will ask yourself before any significant action or communication. Write all 3 down, make them concrete. Start tomorrow. Conclusion. Friends, let us come home. 60,000 thoughts a day. Most of them automatic, many of them distorted, a large proportion of them genuinely useless. And somewhere in that torrent, the thinking that could actually change your life. Now you have the tools to find it, protect it, develop it. Let me give you the complete framework one final time. The problem, most thinking is on autopilot, trapped in the past, the future, or other people's opinions. Cognitive biases distort analysis. Most thoughts are not worth the energy they consume. Principle 1, first principles, strip away every assumption. Reason from verified facts. Most limitations are assumptions, not realities. Principle 2, the Socratic method, question yourself as rigorously as you question others. How do I know this is true? What would someone who disagreed say? What am I assuming? Principle 3, separate emotion from analysis. Let the snow globe settle. Extract the information the emotion contains. Then decide from the clearer state that follows. Principle 4, think long-term. Apply the 10-year test. Identify second and third-order consequences. Choose with the version of you who has lived the outcome. In decisions, have a process. Define accurately. Gather relevant information. List long-term consequences. Decide and commit. Keep a decision journal. In relationships, question your narratives. Apply the minimal interpretation. Ask the actual person rather than constructing the story. In your inner dialogue, speak to yourself the way you would speak to a close friend you respected. Honest, proportionate, constructive. The daily practice, morning observation, evening review, and the pause between stimulus and response. Friends, Darius Foroux wrote this book not as an academic exercise, He wrote it because he had spent years of his own life thinking in ways that made him anxious, indecisive, and unclear, and had found that the specific practices in this book actually changed that. Not dramatically overnight, but gradually, consistently, permanently, through the daily practice of catching the automatic thought, questioning the unexamined belief, separating the emotion from the analysis, and choosing the long view. That practice is available to you, starting with the very next thought you have. Friends, I want to ask you one specific question. Of the 4 principles in this book, first principles thinking, the Socratic method, separating emotion from analysis, and thinking long-term, which one do you most consistently fail to apply? And more specifically, what is one decision you are currently facing where that principle, if applied right now, would change how you see it? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. Subscribe to the 30-Minute Mentor and hit the bell. Every week, a new book, a new perspective, a new tool for building the life you are capable of. Because the clearer you think, the freer you live.